Hi guys, welcome to week 3. This week is all about starting to frame and contextualize our design work into a broader context. There's an important balance that a design thinker needs to strike between emergence and constraints or structures, between providing opportunity for things to be organic, to gardening and making sure that we have a consistent vision. And it's not an easy balance, and I don't have a right answer for it, but I want you to play with it a little bit this week. In some ways, it can be thought of as similar to when you're designing inquiry-based learning for students, if you have experience in that way. You need a way to make sure that students have agency, voice, it's open-ended, it's open to their opportunities to ask questions, seek answers, develop the skills of lifelong learning. But you also need to balance that with providing enough constraints for students to be creative, providing enough direction, mapping that to the programs of study that we have in our contexts, or the goals of the program that you're working within. So I think it's a similar sort of thing to wrestle with this week. How are we going to do that? First of all, there's a tool that I've created that I'd like you to use to work through, which you can print or work digitally, but download that. Then take a minute to think about your I wish. You may revise it at this stage. You may revise it throughout, or it may stay consistent. Part of what I love about design thinking is as we get doing, it often informs how we're understanding what it is we're trying to do, which is quite different than in other contexts where, particularly other research contexts, where our question wouldn't shift. In this case, we want to be open to that. So consider revising your I wish. Then I'd like you to dig into a few places, policy pieces, and research pieces to give us some constraints and guidance. So first of all, I'd like to take a look at the teacher effectiveness framework. We've likely revisited that in the past, looked through that in the past, and this will be a chance to revisit it. But particularly, you're looking for places where you can see your aspiration connected to, linked with, aligned to the TEF. And there's a little box in your tool to just make some jot notes about how the TEF can help you think about your I wish or where the connectivity might be. Then similarly, I want you to pick some sort of policy framework for that guides, provides direction in your context. Because so many of you are school-based, I'd recommend looking at the school education plan for your school. Somebody's already, whether that's a leadership team or the whole school culture, has already looked at how to frame that within your school division context, the provincial context. But you also may choose, if you're thinking about that role of school leadership, you might want to look to a broader policy framework like a ministerial order or the high school redesign framework if you're a part of that. Choose something that seems to make sense for you. But what's important here to remember is that when in a school context particularly, we don't want to get into a situation where we have a whole bunch of competing initiatives. We don't want, we need to consider how divergence can then be followed by convergence. And we're going to play with that all through the term. But one of the ways to do it is to always be considering, okay, as I'm taking up this problem of practice or as I'm pursuing this design opportunity, how is it that it's connected to the planning that we've done as a school community, so that as I'm prototyping and testing in my context, it's informing our bigger work together. So choose a policy framework or planning document of some sort, and again, take some jot notes on that tool. Then what I want you to do is get to the school retool website and check out the big ideas that they've identified there. I want those to, in part, provide a common frame. All throughout this process, I'm trying to model how I'm balancing these same concepts as I'm asking you to balance. So we're gonna use these school retool big ideas as a way to have some common direction and common language. So if you can go to the site and pick two that you feel like will help you ideate for your towards your I wish. So it's as simple as scanning them, seeing ones that you think are a really good fit towards your I wish. You've got a bunch of ideas from your peers from this past week. So consider where you see your I wish reflected with the big ideas, or which big ideas you feel like can help you think about how to move towards your I wish. And then what I want you to do is do a little brainstorm. I want you to start to brainstorm some hacks that you could take up. This is the bias towards action in design thinking. All the time we want to be thinking about, well, what would this mean if we were taking action? And you may choose to take some action. I'm going to ask you to develop a prototype and test it in a subsequent week. But if this week, if there's things, you're probably already trying things in your context in light of your reflection. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is this is a brainstorm opportunity where I want you to think divergently. I want you to consider deferring judgment. You're not committing yourself to doing these things, but at the same time, if things emerge that you feel like you want to try, you can go ahead. I'm using the concept of hacking. School Retool uses that. I've come across it in a few different settings, and it's kind of a nice frame. When we're talking about hacking, of course, there's the whole world of computer program hacking. There's some connectivity to that concept, of course, but I'm reframing it a little bit within our educational context. I like the sub-definition scrappy little experiments, but I'm always careful using the context of experiments with connected with school. The language of experiments conjures up a whole bunch of ideas for people. Another way to think of this would be prototypes. How can we get trying out these ideas so that we can learn more about them? Hacking is playful, it's exploratory, it's the whole idea of scrappy is that it's determined, and I also want you to remember that it needs to be ethical. I think that goes without saying. We're not doing, this is much more like teacher reflective practice than it is research work. But at the same time, the term hacking sometimes conjures up for people an idea of people doing something with ill intent. And of course, that's not at all the context that we're working within here. So brainstorm, they also should be really quick, 1 to 3 days, something you do 1 to 3 days, maybe a single lesson, maybe with one other teacher, maybe with a few students, maybe with your whole class, maybe something you can bring into your classroom that's not going to take you a whole bunch of time to do, that's not going to require a bunch of money. And how can we cheaply, quickly start testing out some action towards our big idea? At this point, it's just a brainstorm. I'd like you to use each of the big ideas you selected as sort of an umbrella concept to give you constraints for that brainstorm. And then once you've got those filled out, you'll post your tool. Last step is I'm going to get you this week to be committed to 2 other people. Actually, in one case, there's only 2 of you in the group, and I'll be the 3rd person. But I've created some critical friend groups randomly, but these people will consistently be asked to commit to providing each other with feedback. This gives you some people who get to understand your thinking process over the course of the term. We're going to do lots of stuff in different groups, but your critical friend group will be a group that we can come back to regularly throughout the term so that they get to know what you're working on and can give you more meaningful feedback in light of understanding where you came from. So I'd like you to use the quick little protocol of I like, I wish, aha, what if, to provide feedback to your critical friends. And that's our work for the week. This is going to transition into continuing to rethink about our I wish, and then moving towards doing a little more digging into the research foundation in week 4, and also getting out to do an empathy exercise with your users, because that's extremely important as well. But again, big picture here is we're trying to frame the input into our design process. We're trying to consider alignment to other work that's going on in our context, and we're trying to use all this as an opportunity to think about what we really want for this opportunity. And later down the road, you're going to use the experience of your own hacks to share with the people you're going to engage to get them thinking about what design ideas they want to explore. So that's kind of part of the bigger, that's how it fits into the bigger vision. But this week, just use that tool, go through the steps, and I'm happy to take any questions in the Ask Josh. One last note, if you're still listening at this length of the video, I'm going to try to post the instructions for the subsequent week on Saturday mornings. Some people felt like that meant that the deadline was Friday. I want you to consider the weekends as either a chance to clear things for the previous week or a way to start for the week ahead. Each of us has our own schedules that we bring to this work. So I'm really flexible about whether you're working the week forward in the weekend or you're finishing up the week behind. With an exception, later in the term, there are some specific deadlines provided to provide critique and revision as people are working, as your critical friends are working on drafts for their assignments. In those cases, I'd like to be hard on the deadline in order to have your peers have a consistent point in which they're going to receive feedback to give them time to make the revisions in light of feedback. But for these weeks where we're in our formative process of without these, when we're not at the draft stage, there's more flexibility in the timeline. However, knowing that those who contribute their things earlier in the week often have an opportunity to be in more dialogue with their peers. So there's certainly an incentive in my mind to getting started earlier in the week, but it's not something that I'm going to be looking at from an assessment perspective. My assessment practice really doesn't allow me to think about lates in that sense whatsoever. So hope that helps. Good luck with week 3, and looking forward to seeing what kind of hacks get generated.